when Roman Reigns became the Tribal Chief, when Vince McMahon stepped down and Triple H took over, when we saw the debut of AJ Styles, the return of Edge and CM Punk, and we also said goodbye to John Cena, The Undertaker, and Bray Wyatt, when Becky Lynch became the man and Rhea Ripley became unstoppable, when the Bloodline Saga ruled WWE and Cody Rhodes finished his story. From 2016 to 2026, the WWE's modern era has given us some iconic stories and moments, along with some of the worst booking decisions of all time. In this video, we're revisiting the complete history of the modern era from its origins with the brand split in 2016, the pandemic-era chaos of 2020, the return of the fans in 2021, the peak of the Bloodline Saga in 2023, all the way to the present day in 2026. Our story starts in January at the Royal Rumble. Heading into WrestleMania 32, WWE's top card was looking seriously bleak as stars like Cena, Rollins, and Orton were all out of action due to injury. Roman Reigns was defending his WWE Championship inside the Rumble match itself, battling the entire roster in one night. The crowd was hostile, the atmosphere tense, and when the countdown hit 0 for the number 3 entrant, everything changed. AJ Styles, the man who had defined TNA wrestling for over a decade, the man who had made his name all over the globe from New Japan to Ring of Honor, stepped onto a WWE pay-per-view stage for the first time in his career. At 38 years old, many wondered if Styles had missed his window. Vince had a reputation for burying talent he didn't create, and the company's track record with outsiders was mixed at best. But from the moment Styles locked eyes with Roman Reigns, it was clear something different was happening. Over the following weeks, Styles quickly aligned himself with Chris Jericho, forming an unlikely partnership that showcased his personality and in-ring brilliance. The two worked seamlessly together, trading victories and building chemistry until their friendship inevitably crumbled. At WrestleMania 32, Styles and Jericho collided in a match that, while solid, left fans worried. Styles lost clean, and the whispers began about whether this was another case of Vince refusing to elevate an outsider. But those fears were quickly erased. Just one night after WrestleMania, Styles won a fatal 4-way #1 contenders match, earning himself a shot at Roman Reigns' championship. Suddenly, the Phenomenal One was in the main event picture. At Payback, Styles and Reigns delivered a hard-hitting encounter that proved Styles belonged at the top of the card. He lost, but the performance mattered more than the result. The rematch came at Extreme Rules, this time under no-holds-barred rules with the help of Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson looming. Once again, Reigns retained, but the matches had accomplished something crucial. They'd established Styles as a legit main event player in the WWE, and then came the feud that would define Styles' year. John Cena returned from shoulder surgery in June, and when he crossed paths with the Phenomenal One, the reaction was deafening. These were two men from completely different worlds. Cena, the PG superhero. Styles, the indie darling who had conquered every territory except this one. Styles mocked Cena's corporate image and questioned his passion for the business. Cena fired back, claiming Styles had spent his entire career in the minor leagues. At Money in the Bank, the two finally met in the ring, and Styles did the unthinkable. He beat John Cena. The win felt monumental. A passing of the torch moment that legitimized everything Styles had accomplished outside WWE. But more importantly, it proved that WWE was willing to invest in him. Following the brand split in July, Styles was drafted to SmackDown, and his rivalry with Cena continued at SummerSlam. Once again, Styles emerged victorious in what many considered the best match of the night. By the time the referee's hand hit the mat for 3, AJ Styles had cemented himself as one of WWE's top stars. But Styles wasn't finished. In September at Backlash, he defeated Dean Ambrose to capture the WWE Championship within 8 months of his debut. For the remainder of 2016, Styles carried SmackDown on his back, defending the title against Ambrose and Cena in a series of excellent matches that proved his reign was no fluke. What made Styles' 2016 run so remarkable wasn't just the speed of his ascent, it was the fact that WWE allowed him to be himself. The company didn't try to change his moveset, his personality, or his presentation. They trusted him, and he repaid that trust by delivering at every opportunity. By year's end, AJ had gone from an uncertain debut to WWE champion, proving that he was what he always claimed to be, simply phenomenal. But while Styles was conquering new territory, 3 former brothers were on a collision course that had been building since 2014. The Shield had been unstoppable. Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, and Dean Ambrose had dominated WWE as a unit before Rollins turned his back on his brothers, shattering the Brotherhood with a chair shot heard around the world. For 2 years, the three had traveled separate paths. Rollins became a corporate champion before injury took his title away. Reigns was pushed as the face of the company despite fan resistance. And Ambrose, the scrappy underdog, had clawed his way into relevance through sheer determination and charisma. At Extreme Rules, after Reigns retained his championship against Styles, the arena fell silent. Rollins made his return from his devastating knee injury and made his intentions clear immediately, laying out Reigns with a pedigree. The architect had returned, and he wanted what he'd never lost. What followed was a slow-burning build to the match everyone had been dreaming about since 2014. At Money in the Bank in June, Reigns and Rollins went to war in a near 30-minute classic that showcased their chemistry. Rollins won the title back, reclaiming what injury had stolen from him. But the celebration was short-lived. Dean Ambrose had won the Money in the Bank contract earlier that night, and as Rollins celebrated his hard-fought victory, the lunatic fringe struck Rollins with the briefcase, and in a moment of poetic justice, pinned the man who broke the Shield to become WWE Champion. The tables had turned. The man who had been left for dead by Rollins in 2014 now stood tall with the gold. But the real story was what happened in those 10 minutes. All 3 Shield members had held the gold on the same night, and it meant one thing was now inevitable: the Shield triple threat. At Battleground in July, the 3 finally collided in the match the fans had been begging for. And when Ambrose scored the pinfall to retain his championship, it felt like the end of a chapter that had defined wrestling for over 3 years. And with the WWE Championship now heading to SmackDown with Ambrose, the landscape of the company was about to change forever. On July 19th, WWE pulled the trigger on an idea they hadn't touched in 5 years: the brand split. Raw and SmackDown would once again operate as separate entities with exclusive rosters, championships, and creative directions. The draft saw Stephanie McMahon and Mick Foley take control of Raw, selecting stars like Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, former NXT champion Finn, and Charlotte Flair. Meanwhile, Shane McMahon and Daniel Bryan built SmackDown around Dean Ambrose, AJ Styles, John Cena, Bray Wyatt, and Randy Orton. The split immediately injected new life into the weekly television shows. For the first time in years, both shows mattered. SmackDown Live, rebranded with a new blue aesthetic, embraced its underdog status. The show was dubbed the Land of Opportunity, and they proved it by giving fresh matchups and overlooked talent a chance to shine. Styles dominated SmackDown as WWE Champion, but the show's strength came from its depth. Heath Slater, who went undrafted, turned his desperation into comedy gold, begging for a contract on both brands before finally winning the SmackDown Tag Team Championships with Rhino. The Miz transformed the Intercontinental Championship into a prestigious prize, delivering promos that reminded everyone why he was one of the best talkers in the company. His rivalry with Dolph Ziggler at No Mercy saw Ziggler put his career on the line, and the match delivered an emotional classic that elevated both men. Meanwhile, Randy Orton's slow-burn descent into the Wyatt family provided SmackDown with a psychological thriller. Talking Smack, the post-show hosted by Daniel Bryan and Renee Young, became must-see as the unscripted promos created viral moments that sometimes overshadowed the main show itself. The Miz's infamous promo tearing into Daniel Bryan for calling him a coward became one of the most talked-about segments of the year. Raw, on the other hand, struggled with identity issues early on. The Demon King made his main roster debut and faced Seth Rollins for the inaugural Universal Championship at SummerSlam. The match was excellent, and Finn's victory felt like the dawn of a new era. But sadly, a shoulder injury during the match forced him to vacate the title the very next night. The Universal Championship eventually landed on Kevin Owens after Triple H turned on Seth Rollins. Owens' reign, while criticized by some, gave birth to one of the year's most entertaining dynamics: the friendship between Kevin Owens and Chris Jericho. The two became inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and creating comedy gold with the List of Jericho. What started as a gimmick with a clipboard and a pen became one of the most over acts in the company. The Red brand also reintroduced the Cruiserweight division, hoping to recapture the magic of the Cruiserweight Classic tournament that had aired earlier in the year. TJ Perkins became the inaugural champion, and stars like Rich Swann, Cedric Alexander, and Neville joined the roster. Unfortunately, the division struggled to connect with live crowds, often treated as a bathroom break rather than a showcase of athleticism. The women's division on Raw became defined by the rivalry between Sasha Banks and Charlotte Flair. The two exchanged the Raw Women's Championship multiple times throughout the year, even delivering the first-ever Women's Hell in a Cell match in October. By the time Survivor Series arrived in November, both brands had established distinct identities. The pay-per-view was built around brand supremacy, with Raw and SmackDown going head-to-head in a series of matches. The men's traditional 5-on-5 match was chaotic, with SmackDown pulling off the victory. But the real shock came in the main event. Goldberg had returned to WWE after 12 years away, and his opponent was Brock Lesnar, the beast who had ended The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak. The build promised violence. Instead, it delivered stunned silence. In 86 seconds, Goldberg destroyed Lesnar with 2 spears and a jackhammer, ending the match before it truly began. The man who had dominated WWE for the last 2 years had been squashed in under 90 seconds. But while the main roster was experiencing its renaissance, WWE's developmental brand was having the best year in its history. NXT had already proven itself as a legit third brand by 2015, but 2016 was the year it truly became must-see. As stars like Finn, Sami, Owens, Bayley, and Sasha Banks graduated to the main roster, new faces arrived to fill the void, and NXT didn't miss a beat. On April 1st at TakeOver Dallas, the wrestling world witnessed something special. Shinsuke Nakamura, the king of strong style from New Japan Pro Wrestling, made his WWE debut against Sami Zayn in a match that is still replayed to this day. The entrance alone, with Nakamura's theatrical charisma, set the tone. When Nakamura hit the Kinshasa for the victory, it was clear NXT had just signed its next megastar. Bobby Roode debuted with his glorious entrance that became an instant phenomenon. Samoa Joe, already established as a monster, captured the NXT Championship and began a reign of terror that saw him become the brand's first 2-time world champion. The women's division, led by Asuka's seemingly unstoppable run, delivered classic after classic, but perhaps no match in 2016 better exemplified NXT's commitment to wrestling excellence than DIY versus The Revival at TakeOver Toronto. The 2 out of 3 Falls tag team match felt like it was pulled straight from the dream of a wrestling purist. Other stars like Austin Aries, Andrade, Ty Dillinger, and Sanity brought their own unique flavor to the delicious recipe of the black and gold brand. NXT in 2016 wasn't just about great matches, though. It was about purpose. Every storyline made sense. Every character had clear motivations. The shows were tight, efficient, and never wasted a moment. While the main roster sometimes stumbled with overproduced segments and questionable booking, NXT felt like pure wrestling. It was a reminder that sometimes less really is more. It's a shame that Triple H hasn't been able to replicate the same magic on the main roster. But in 2016, NXT had firmly established itself as more than just a developmental territory. It was a proving ground for the future, a haven for wrestling fans who craved quality, and a brand that could stand shoulder to shoulder with Raw and SmackDown in terms of importance. But beyond the headlines and championship reigns, 2016 was filled with moments that reminded fans why they loved wrestling in the first place. Shane McMahon came back after 7 years away and immediately threw himself off the Hell in a Cell at WrestleMania because, well, that's what Shane does. His partnership with Daniel Bryan as SmackDown's leadership became one of the year's most enjoyable dynamics. Enzo and Cass brought their infectious energy to Raw, Braun Strowman emerged from the Wyatt family's shadow and began his transformation into a monster. The New Day continued their record-breaking reign as tag team champions, Becky Lynch won the SmackDown Women's title, the Usos finally turned heel, and most importantly, wrestling felt fun again. But after the excellence of 2016, 2017 was about to be chaotic. A year that saw 2 best friends tear each other apart. When Goldberg and Lesnar went to war, when the Hardy Boys made their return, when The Undertaker walked into WrestleMania and never walked out the same, when 3 brothers reunited to remind everyone who ran the yard. 2017 wasn't just another year in WWE, it was the year the company leaned hard into dream matches, personal vendettas, and nostalgia, and somehow made all of it feel fresh. Our story starts with the most entertaining bromance WWE had seen in years. Kevin Owens and Chris Jericho had been inseparable since the 2016 brand split, running roughshod over Raw together as the self-proclaimed best friends in the world. Owens held the Universal Championship. Jericho had his list. Together, they ruled Monday Night Raw. But friendships built on convenience rarely last. When Jericho, without consulting Owens, accepted a Universal Championship challenge from Goldberg on his behalf, Owens quietly began plotting his exit. The axe fell on the February 13th episode of Raw during the Festival of Friendship, a segment Jericho had planned as a celebration of everything they'd built together. And then Owens handed Jericho a gift. A new list, but Jericho's name was already on it. What followed was a vicious beatdown that sent Jericho out on a stretcher. The score was settled at WrestleMania 33, where Owens captured the United States Championship in a hard-hitting match that closed the chapter on one of the most compelling partnerships in years. The fallout from the Festival of Friendship led directly to the next great collision. Goldberg, back in WWE after more than a decade, had steamrolled Lesnar at Survivor Series 2016 in under 2 minutes. He then destroyed Owens in seconds at Fastlane to claim the Universal Championship. The man was a runaway train, but Brock Lesnar was waiting at the end of the tracks. At WrestleMania 33, the rematch everyone wanted finally happened. Lesnar and Goldberg went back and forth in a quick finisher spam bout that saw the Beast come out on top as the new Universal Champion. But the night wasn't done delivering its gut punches. In the main event, Roman Reigns faced The Undertaker in a no-holds-barred match. The Phenom, clearly diminished and moving on borrowed time, gave everything he had. When the 3 count came, Reigns had done what only one man before him had managed at WrestleMania. The Undertaker slowly rose, removed his gloves, hat, and coat, placed them in the center of the ring, and walked away. The arena fell completely silent, a bittersweet ending to a turbulent WrestleMania. But while Reigns and Lesnar dominated the red brand through the summer and fall, the blue brand told a different kind of story. Bray Wyatt won the WWE Championship inside the Elimination Chamber, only to lose it to Randy Orton shortly after. Jinder Mahal also had a brief run with the gold, before AJ Styles reclaimed the title later in the year and went on a generational run. Elsewhere on the card, John Cena and The Miz had a deeply personal rivalry that ended with Cena proposing to Nikki Bella at WrestleMania. The real fireworks on Raw, though, were still to come. Roman Reigns had been fighting The Miz and his band of lackeys for weeks and was getting outnumbered every time. The solution was obvious to everyone watching. The Shield reunited for the first time in years, and the reaction was thunderous. Ambrose, Rollins, and Reigns were back, setting up a massive TLC match against The Miz, Braun Strowman, Kane, Cesaro, and Sheamus. It wasn't a permanent reunion, though, as Reigns had to be replaced at TLC by Kurt Angle, and Ambrose suffered a tricep injury weeks later. But while the run lasted, it reminded everyone why the Shield had been the most dominant faction of their generation. TLC also saw the Demon King face the Phenomenal One in a dream match between the 2 former Bullet Club leaders. On Raw, Braun Strowman spent the year establishing himself as an unstoppable force, dismantling Reigns in violent encounters across the spring and summer, including tipping over an ambulance with Reigns inside, while SmackDown got an intense feud between Kevin Owens and Shane McMahon. Overall, 2017 was a mixed bag of highs and lows with dream matches, reunions, and returns. But as 2017 came to an end, the pieces were in place for what was supposed to be a generational 2018, but ended up falling just short. When Becky Lynch became the man, when Daniel Bryan returned to action, when a dream match between Styles and Nakamura turned into a low-blow contest, when Roman Reigns vacated the Universal title and a brother stabbed another brother in the back on the worst possible night, and when a new women's era didn't just knock on the door, it kicked it clean off the hinges. For years, Becky Lynch had been right there, talented enough, over enough, ready enough, and then passed over, every single time. By mid-2018, she'd built up a winning streak on SmackDown and finally earned her shot at the Women's Championship at SummerSlam. Then, a week before the show, Charlotte Flair was inserted into the match. It was the story of Becky's career. Charlotte always found a way to ruin her moment. At SummerSlam in Brooklyn, Flair stole Lynch's moment and became SmackDown Women's Champion. And then Lynch snapped. She attacked Flair after the bell and the Brooklyn crowd erupted. WWE had planned a heel turn, but instead, Becky became the biggest babyface in the company. Lynch came out on SmackDown 2 days later expecting boos, but instead, she got more cheers. The Irish Lass Kicker character had been accidentally upgraded into something even more electric. She called herself The Man, grew a chip on her shoulder the size of a continent, and refused to apologize for any of it. At Hell in a Cell, she beat Flair to win the title. At WWE Evolution, the company's first ever all-women's pay-per-view, she retained in a brutal last woman standing match. By the time 2018 ended, Becky Lynch wasn't just the most popular woman on the roster, she was arguably the most popular person in all of wrestling. But if Becky's story was the year's greatest triumph, then Styles vs. Nakamura was its biggest comedy. Styles and Nakamura had been New Japan legends. Their match at Wrestle Kingdom is considered one of the greatest matches in history. When Nakamura won the Royal Rumble and pointed at the WrestleMania sign, fans were ready to see them run it back on the grandest stage of them all. However, the actual match at WrestleMania 34 was a disappointment. It was slow and cautious, where it should have been explosive. But the aftermath is where things got straight up weird. As Styles held the title, Nakamura kneeled down, presented it to him in a show of respect, then delivered a low blow and turned heel. They spent the next 3 months attacking each other below the belt figuratively and literally. It finally ended at Money in the Bank, where Styles won a last man standing match with the chemistry that had been missing since WrestleMania. Meanwhile, over on Raw, the year's most human storyline was unfolding. Roman Reigns had been forced down the fans' throats for years. They'd rejected him, booed him, chanted anything to drown him out. But on October 22nd, Reigns walked to the ring and told the world his leukemia had returned after 11 years in remission. He placed the Universal Championship in the center of the ring and walked away. The fans who had booed him minutes earlier were now left in shock. The same night Reigns made his announcement, Ambrose and Rollins stood tall with the Raw Tag Team Championships together in the main event. It was the kind of moment that felt like a sweet ending to an emotional night. But then Dean Ambrose turned on Seth Rollins. He dropped his brother with a dirty deeds and beat him up mercilessly. But the follow-through never matched the emotional impact of the moment. Ambrose's heel character was poorly written, the feud with Rollins lacked the intensity it deserved, and within months, it was clear Ambrose had one foot out the door. But while the Rollins versus Ambrose feud never got the platform it deserved, the more satisfying comeback story of the year belonged to SmackDown. Daniel Bryan had been medically cleared after nearly 3 years away from the ring after being forced into retirement by a series of concussions. At WrestleMania 34, he returned to compete in a tag match alongside Shane McMahon. But it was later in the year that Bryan truly turned the page. On a SmackDown in November, he won the WWE Championship from AJ Styles when he hit Styles with a low blow and walked out a heel. The man the fans had cheered for years was now everything they hated. 2018 also reshaped WWE's women's division from top to bottom. In January, Asuka won the first ever Women's Royal Rumble match, main eventing the pay-per-view in a historic milestone. Immediately after, Ronda Rousey made her surprise debut, pointing at the WrestleMania sign and confirming she'd signed full-time. She made her in-ring debut at WrestleMania teaming with Kurt Angle, won the Raw Women's Championship later during the year, and headlined Evolution, all in her first year. NXT continued to outshine the main roster with consistency and storytelling clarity, producing standout performances from talents who would later reshape Raw and SmackDown. The NXT title scene revolved around names like Ciampa, Gargano, and Aleister Black, while the Undisputed Era fever was slowly taking over the brand. In a quieter corner of Raw, Matt Hardy and Bray Wyatt's Woken Universe gave the midcard something strange and fun at a time when it desperately needed it. 2018 was a year of extremes. Its lowest moments showed creative spinning its wheels. Its highest moments, Becky's rise, Bryan's transformation, Reigns' honesty, reminded everyone why this business could still make you feel something. But as the year of 2018 came to an end, it was time for the worst year in WWE history. When the company's top guy was literally fed dog food on live television. A year that saw Goldberg and The Undertaker risk their life for the sweet Saudi money. When the Universal Champion lost all his aura by cowering in fear and getting buried in one of the worst Hell in a Cell matches of all time. When the feel-good story of the decade ended with an 8-second squash. When Cain Velasquez and Tyson Fury appeared in the WWE ring in matches literally nobody asked for. When watching Rusev get emasculated on worldwide TV was a weekly tradition. And these are just a few of the creative disasters that defined WWE in 2019. From a storytelling and booking standpoint, WWE in 2019 was absolute trash. Despite generating a record-breaking $960 million in revenue, the product on screen was arguably at its lowest point in decades. But what exactly made WWE in 2019 so universally hated by fans? What were the catastrophic matches, embarrassing moments, and questionable booking decisions that turned wrestling's biggest company into a laughingstock? How does WWE in 2019 compare to the product we see today? Let's rewind the clock and revisit what many consider to be the worst year in WWE history. As WWE is reportedly heading to Saudi Arabia for WrestleMania 43, let's start with WWE's obsession with the Saudi shows in 2019. The year's Saudi disasters began with Super Showdown in June, headlined by what can only be described as a potential manslaughter. The Undertaker vs. Goldberg was supposed to be a dream match between two legends, but instead became a terrifying display of what happens when age catches up with part-time performers. This match was doomed even before the bell rang. Goldberg hit his head too damn hard on a door during his entrance, and gave him a concussion even before the match started. But that was just the beginning of this comedy of errors. 2 minutes into the match, Goldberg hit his head against the ring post while attempting a spear and made his concussion even worse. After this, Taker botched a tombstone and had the already concussed Goldberg go headfirst on the mat. In another comical effort, Goldberg nearly broke The Undertaker's neck with a botched jackhammer. The match dragged on for nearly 10 agonizing minutes, with both men stumbling around the ring like they were competing in a retirement home. Even the finish looked weird with a weak chokeslam, and Undertaker's face told the entire story. Two legends almost lost their life in the ring on that night. But the Saudi shows didn't stop there. Crown Jewel in October, brought us even more nonsensical booking decisions. Cain Velasquez, the guy from UFC, was given a world title shot against Brock Lesnar after just one WWE match. The contest lasted barely 2 minutes and served no purpose other than to give Saudi audiences a mainstream name and make quick money. Even worse was the Tyson Fury versus Braun Strowman spectacle, which ended in countout. These Saudi shows represented everything wrong with WWE's approach in 2019. They prioritized celebrity cameos and part-timers over actual storytelling, threw together random matches with zero build-up, and consistently put performers in dangerous situations just to make bank. You can see the same reliance on celebrities and part-timers continuing in the company even today. The worst part was that these events actively damaged ongoing feuds and characters. The Saudi shows felt completely disconnected from ongoing storylines, and it looked like the matches existed in a bizarre parallel universe. This created a disjointed viewing experience for the few fans who were actually invested in the weekly product. Speaking of disjointed storylines, the Saudi shows were just the tip of the iceberg. Back on the main roster, WWE's inability to book meaningful feuds became glaringly obvious. Seth Rollins, fresh off his triumphant WrestleMania victory, was about to enter a chapter of his career so bad that he had to undergo a complete gimmick change. If you wanted a perfect example of how WWE could take their hottest babyface and completely kill his momentum, look no further than Seth Rollins in 2019. Coming out of WrestleMania 35, Rollins was on fire. He just conquered Brock Lesnar in a dominant performance, and Raw finally had a full-time world champion that fans could rally behind. But instead of capitalizing on Rollins' white-hot momentum, WWE immediately threw him into a feud with Baron Corbin. For months, fans had to endure the Universal Champion, the top guy on Monday Night Raw, trading wins and losses with a mid-card heel whose biggest character trait was being generically annoying. The feud reached a new low at Stomping Grounds, a pay-per-view so poorly received that half the arena was literally tarped off due to poor ticket sales. The main event featured Rollins defending his Universal Championship against Corbin, with Lacey Evans serving as special guest referee. However, the Corbin feud was just the beginning of Rollins' 2019 nightmare. The company seemed determined to strip away everything that made Seth appealing as a character. The badass who had dominated Brock Lesnar was suddenly cowering in fear from the Fiend. Rollins' Twitter feud with Will Ospreay in 2019, while not directly WWE's fault, made their top champion look petty and immature when he should have been above such nonsense. The booking got so bad that when Rollins finally faced the Fiend at Hell in a Cell, fans were actively rooting against the supposed top babyface of the company. WWE had taken their most popular full-time champion and systematically destroyed everything that made him special. But if Rollins' booking was bad, it was nothing compared to what WWE had in store for his Shield brother and their supposed franchise player. Roman Reigns' booking in 2019 was a clinic in how to make your supposed top star look like a complete joke. Fresh off his emotional return from leukemia, WWE somehow managed to book Roman into the most ridiculous storylines imaginable. The year's most bizarre chapter began with what can only be described as a failed murder mystery. Scaffolding was mysteriously falling on Reigns backstage, his car was getting destroyed in parking lots, and someone was literally trying to unalive Roman Reigns. After months of speculation involving everyone from Samoa Joe to Buddy Murphy, the big reveal ended up being Eric Rowan. The forgettable Wyatt family member was apparently a criminal mastermind bent on destroying the big dog because he wanted to break free from being Daniel Bryan's puppet. But the murder mystery was just the appetizer for the main course of Roman's stupid booking. Baron Corbin, WWE's go-to guy for killing crowd reactions, decided that since Roman called himself the big dog, he must literally be a dog. The logical conclusion for Corbin was to feed Roman actual dog food on live TV. And that's exactly what happened. The company's franchise player, a former world champion, was literally fed dog food on live television in one of the most stupid segments of all time. However, that wasn't even the worst part of the feud. Corbin hired someone to dress up in a dog costume, complete with a remixed version of Roman's entrance music in one of the cringiest segments in history. Throughout all of this, Roman never felt like the top guy. Despite his positioning on the card and his obvious push, the booking made him feel like a mid-card comedy act stuck in nonsensical feuds with Baron Corbin. The sad part is that this was supposed to be Roman's triumphant return after his absence due to leukemia, but instead of conquering mountains, he was quite literally rolling around in dog food. But it wasn't just Reigns and Rollins. Ambrose's booking got so bad he literally quit the company. As if WWE wasn't doing enough damage to their current roster, 2019 also marked the end of one of the most successful factions in modern wrestling history. Dean Ambrose's departure from WWE became another example of the company's pettiness when stars decided to leave. Rather than giving Ambrose a proper send-off, WWE spent his final months systematically burying him. They had him lose meaningless matches, cut promos about how much he hated the WWE Universe, wear a goofy Bane mask, get injections in his butt on live TV, and generally treated him like damaged goods on his way out the door. The Shield's final chapter special on April 21st felt more like a funeral than a celebration. And by the time Ambrose walked away, his character had been so thoroughly damaged that he had to morph back into Jon Moxley when he signed with AEW. But even after Ambrose's departure, the real disasters of 2019 were just getting started. The Hell in a Cell match between Seth Rollins and The Fiend wasn't just bad, it was historically awful. The red lighting made it impossible for fans to see what was happening, and the booking made no sense. The Fiend could use mallets and other weapons, but when Seth retaliated with a sledgehammer, the referee called for a stoppage in Hell in a Cell, a structure specifically designed for no disqualification battles. The match ended in a no contest, with frustrated fans literally chanting for refunds and AEW. But perhaps the most heartbreaking moment of 2019 was what happened to Kofi Kingston. After the feel-good story of Kofi Mania captivated audiences at WrestleMania, WWE decided to end his 180-day WWE Championship reign in the most deflating way possible. Kofi Kingston's journey to WWE Champion was the kind of organic, feel-good story that wrestling fans live for. His 6-month reign saw him defend the title against names like Daniel Bryan, Samoa Joe, Randy Orton, and others. The New Day member had finally reached the mountaintop after 11 years of hard work, and fans were genuinely rooting for his success. He could have went on to turn heel. He could have feuded against his New Day brothers. He could have gone on to become a key player on the main event scene, but instead, WWE decided to end his reign in the most soul-crushing way imaginable. On SmackDown's 20th anniversary special in October, Brock Lesnar squashed Kofi Kingston in 8 seconds so that WWE could book Lesnar versus Cain Velasquez in Saudi and make quick money. Over a decade of hard work ended with one F5 and a pin. The worst part is that Kofi never got his rematch. WWE moved on as if Kofi Mania had never happened, and the New Day member fell back into the tag team division. But if Kofi's story was heartbreaking, the fumbling of Becky Lynch versus Ronda Rousey was straight up infuriating. This should have been the easiest money match in WWE history. The man versus the baddest woman on the planet in a dream one-on-one encounter that fans had been clamoring for since Rousey's debut. Instead, WWE managed to overcomplicate the story by throwing Charlotte Flair into the mix. The build was a masterclass in how not to book a marquee match. They added unnecessary stipulations, convoluted storylines, and turned what should have been a straightforward war between two badass women into a confusing mess. The WrestleMania 35 main event, while historic for being the first women's match to headline the show, felt underwhelming compared to what could have been. Even Kurt Angle's retirement match became a disappointment when WWE decided that Baron Corbin, yes, Baron Corbin again, should be the one to retire the Olympic hero. One of the greatest wrestlers of all time deserved better than a forgettable send-off against WWE's least charismatic performer of the year. But speaking of performers who ruined great moments, no discussion of 2019's failures would be complete without addressing the Shane McMahon problem. If 2019 had an unofficial MVP for Worst Performer, Shane McMahon would win by a landslide. After winning the meaningless Best in the World tournament in 2018, Shane descended into absolute madness and became the most overexposed non-wrestler in WWE history. What started as occasional appearances by the boss's son turned into a nightmare scenario where entire episodes of Raw and SmackDown revolved around Shane's ego-driven storylines. The Shane McMahon Show reached its peak absurdity when he began entering every arena to the sounds of Greg Hamilton nearly passing out while announcing him as the best in the world. The crowd reactions weren't cheers or even traditional heel heat. They were groans of exhaustion from fans who were sick of seeing the same nonsense week after week. His storylines made no logical sense. He had a rivalry with The Miz that somehow lasted months. He hired Drew McIntyre and Baron Corbin as his personal enforcers. And most bizarrely, he decided to target Roman Reigns in a feud that did nothing but waste everyone's time. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of Shane's 2019 dominance was the backstage rumor that WWE seriously considered putting the WWE Championship on him. But even Shane's overexposure paled in comparison to the more bizarre personal storylines that WWE inexplicably decided to air on national television. Just when you thought WWE couldn't possibly make Raw and SmackDown more uncomfortable to watch, 2019 delivered some of the most cringe-inducing personal storylines in wrestling history. The year was littered with awkward relationship angles that made fans reach for their remote controls, but none were more painful than the love triangle between Rusev, Lana, and Bobby Lashley. The storyline began with Lana announcing on live television that she wanted a divorce from Rusev because she had fallen in love with Bobby Lashley. What followed was weeks of uncomfortable segments featuring Lana and Lashley making out in the middle of the ring and celebrating their relationship while Rusev played the role of the helpless ex-husband. The feud kept getting worse with a wedding segment that saw Liv Morgan get involved and profess her love for Lana. But the Rusev-Lana debacle wasn't the only relationship angle that made fans uncomfortable. The Mike Kanellis and Maria storyline somehow managed to be even more bizarre. Maria announced on live television that she was pregnant, then proceeded to emasculate her real-life husband Mike by declaring that she wished Becky Lynch had impregnated her instead because she's more of a man than Mike. The angle continued with Maria berating Mike for being weak and unsuccessful while she was pregnant with their child. WWE in 2019 was a year that tested the loyalty of even the most dedicated wrestling fans. The most frustrating part was that WWE made nearly $1 billion that year, proving that financial success doesn't always translate to good television. At first, it looked like WWE in 2020 would be just another normal year. I mean, we got the epic return of Edge. Drew McIntyre won the Royal Rumble. The Undertaker won some random trophy at the Saudi show. But apart from that, it seemed like business as usual. But then, the pandemic hit, and WWE straight up turned into Bizarro World. Suddenly, you had Seth Rollins literally trying to make Rey Mysterio go blind. The Undertaker and AJ Styles gave us this legendary meme. Baron Corbin was throwing people off the WWE headquarters and attempting straight-up murder. Becky Lynch got pregnant. A bunch of ninjas started invading Raw for some reason. Roman Reigns returned after months away and suddenly had maximum aura as the head of the table. Randy Orton went on a legend-killing spree. And somehow, through all the chaos, WWE kept getting wild with cinematic matches and virtual LED screens in the Thunderdome. So what made WWE in 2020 so bizarre yet so entertaining? What were the feuds, the moments, and the decisions that defined WWE's strangest year? And how does WWE in 2020 compare to WWE today? Let's rewind the clock and revisit the year WWE lost its mind. Our story starts at the Royal Rumble in Houston, Texas. Just like every year, fans were excited for surprise entrants, shocking eliminations, and the promise of WrestleMania dreams coming true. But nobody was prepared for what happened at number 21. The countdown hit 0. The familiar guitar riff of Metalingus blared through the speakers. And after 9 years away, Edge walked onto the stage as the arena exploded. Fans were on their feet, watching a man who'd been forced to retire in 2011 due to career-ending neck injuries stand in a WWE ring once again. Edge was running the ropes, hitting spears, and it felt like we were back in 2006 again. It didn't matter that he didn't win. The rated R superstar was back, and wrestling felt whole again. But Edge's return wasn't the only story that night. Drew McIntyre had spent years rebuilding his career after being released in 2014. He'd worked on the indies, reinvented himself, and returned to WWE as a monster. Now standing as one of the final four in the Rumble, Drew faced Roman Reigns in the closing moments. With one devastating Claymore kick, McIntyre eliminated the big dog and pointed at the WrestleMania sign. The Scottish Warrior had won his ticket to the main event. 2 months later at WrestleMania 36, Drew McIntyre defeated Brock Lesnar to capture the WWE Championship. The Performance Center crowd was practically silent due to pandemic restrictions, robbing Drew of his crowning moment in front of thousands. But despite the surreal circumstances, McIntyre became the face of Raw during WWE's most challenging period. Throughout 2020, Drew carried the company with excellent matches against Seth Rollins, Bobby Lashley, and Randy Orton. He brought legitimacy and intensity to a championship scene that desperately needed both. But while Drew was establishing himself as WWE Champion on Raw, the Universal Championship scene on SmackDown was descending into absolute chaos. The Fiend had been booked as an unstoppable force of nature heading into 2020. Bray Wyatt's terrifying alter ego had dominated SmackDown for months, defeating everyone from Daniel Bryan to Seth Rollins with ease. His supernatural presentation, combined with in-ring dominance, made him feel invincible. But then WWE made a decision that shocked the wrestling world. At Super Showdown in Saudi Arabia, Goldberg squashed The Fiend in just minutes. The Fiend, who had seemed unstoppable just weeks earlier, lost all his mystique in one terrible booking decision. Fans couldn't understand why WWE would destroy the momentum of their most captivating character to put the title on a 53-year-old part-timer. But Bray Wyatt wasn't finished. If WWE wouldn't let The Fiend dominate, he'd find another way to leave his mark. When WrestleMania 36 rolled around in early April, Wyatt challenged John Cena to a match. But what followed wasn't a normal match at all. It was the Firefly Funhouse match, a cinematic masterpiece that deconstructed Cena's entire career. For almost 15 minutes, Wyatt took Cena through different eras of his career, exposing his insecurities and failures. Cena was shown as a ruthless aggression rookie desperate to prove himself, as the doctor of thugonomics trying to be cool, as the Super Cena who buried younger talent, as the desperate veteran clinging to past glory. The match ended with The Fiend pinning Cena in the middle of the ring, giving Bray Wyatt the WrestleMania victory over Cena that might have arrived 6 years too late. It was one of the most talked about matches of the year, and the Firefly Funhouse match proved that when forced into an empty arena with no crowd, wrestling could still create magic by thinking completely outside the box. But speaking of cinematic masterpieces, the dead man was about to redefine what a wrestling match could be. The Undertaker's career had been winding down for years. Reduced to part-time appearances and nostalgia acts, the dead man's best days seemed long behind him. His matches against the likes of Goldberg and DX had become increasingly difficult to watch as his body betrayed him. But AJ Styles saw an opportunity. The Phenomenal One had joined WWE in 2016 and accomplished almost everything except one thing: he'd never beat The Undertaker. In early 2020, Styles began calling out Taker, mocking his legacy and claiming the dead man was too old and broken to compete. Styles made it personal by mocking Taker's real-life relationships. At WrestleMania 36, the two were scheduled to face off. But there was a problem. WrestleMania 36 was taking place in an empty WWE Performance Center due to the pandemic. A traditional Undertaker entrance in silence would have been depressing. So WWE made a bold choice. They'd film a cinematic boneyard match instead. On the night of April 5th, fans watched as AJ Styles arrived at a cemetery in the dead of night with his fellow OC members Gallows and Anderson. After this, The Undertaker arrived on his bike looking like the coolest dude on the planet. What followed was 20 minutes of pure entertainment. Styles and his crew were picked off one by one. There were supernatural powers on display. And in the final moments, Taker threw Styles into an open grave and buried him alive. The match was ridiculous, over the top, and absolutely perfect. Without the limitations of a traditional wrestling match, Undertaker could finally move the way his body allowed while still maintaining his legendary aura. The Boneyard match became an instant classic and showed WWE that cinematic matches could work when done right. More importantly, it gave The Undertaker the WrestleMania moment he deserved in what would be his final Mania match. But while Undertaker was literally burying his opponents, another superstar was trying to make his opponents go blind. Seth Rollins had spent 2019 as the babyface champion of Raw, but by early 2020, something had changed. The fans had turned on Rollins, and the Monday Night Messiah had been born. Rollins believed he was the savior of WWE, the leader who would guide the company into the future. His disciples, Murphy and the authors of Pain, followed him faithfully. But Rollins needed to prove his power, and he chose the perfect victim, Rey Mysterio. However, this wasn't any normal feud. Rollins was literally trying to make Mysterio go blind. Dominic Mysterio stepped up to defend his father, but he got tied to the ring ropes and beat up mercilessly by the Messiah. However, while Rollins was terrorizing the Mysterios on Raw, SmackDown was about to undergo a transformation that would define WWE for years to come. Roman Reigns had been missing from WWE TV since the start of 2020. As someone with a history of leukemia, Reigns made the difficult decision to stay home during the early pandemic months. WWE moved forward without him. But in August, everything changed. At SummerSlam, Braun Strowman defended the Universal Championship against The Fiend in a Falls Count Anywhere match. But just as the show was about to close, Roman Reigns made his return and attacked both Strowman and The Fiend, leaving them both laid out. At Payback, Reigns defeated both men to capture the Universal Championship. And just like that, Roman Reigns had turned heel for the first time in his career. Gone was the smiling, fighting babyface who cut corny promos. In his place stood the Tribal Chief, the head of the table, a ruthless and calculating villain who believed he was WWE royalty. Reigns aligned himself with Paul Heyman and made him his wiseman. Heyman provided the verbal skills Reigns lacked, while Reigns provided the intimidating presence Heyman needed. But Roman needed more than just a mouthpiece. He needed everyone to acknowledge him. That's when Roman started psychological warfare on his own cousins and tortured his own family to cement his power. The tribal chief wasn't just a heel. He was family-focused, ruthlessly efficient, and genuinely believed he was doing the right thing by forcing his family to fall in line. Over the following months, Jay became Roman's enforcer, caught between loyalty to his family and hatred for what Roman had done to him. The storytelling was nuanced, complex, and some of the best character work WWE had done in years. Roman Reigns had finally found his character, and it would carry him to the top of WWE for years to come. But while Roman was establishing his dominance on SmackDown, Raw was dealing with its own brand of chaos. Randy Orton spent 2020 reminding everyone why he was called the Legend Killer. His rivalry with Edge defined the first half of the year when Orton put Edge back on the shelf and even RKO'd Edge's wife. But Orton wasn't done targeting legends. Throughout the summer, he went on a rampage. He attacked Ric Flair, Christian, Big Show, Shawn Michaels, and Orton had evolved from Legend Killer to outright psychopath. But while Orton was slaying legends, WWE was trying bizarre experiments that ranged from interesting to completely weird. Raw Underground debuted in 2020, with Shane McMahon hosting an underground fight club that felt like a watered-down version of Lucha Underground. Then came Retribution, a faction of masked wrestlers who invaded Raw, destroyed equipment, and the mystery was intriguing until WWE unmasked them and revealed they were developmental talent nobody cared about. Oh, and did I tell you about the time Asuka became the Raw Women's Champion by cashing in on a vacant champion because Rollins forgot to use protection and Becky got pregnant? Or what about the time WWE held Money in the Bank inside the WWE headquarters and Baron Corbin was literally trying to murder people? Yeah, WWE in 2020 was unhinged like that. By the time December arrived, WWE had survived a global pandemic. They'd created stars like Drew McIntyre and solidified others like Roman Reigns. And they'd proven that even without crowds, the show must go on. Looking back now, WWE in 2020 feels like a fever dream. It had cinematic matches, supernatural storylines, and the Bloodline Saga on SmackDown reached a new level. A year that saw the Tribal Chief defend his throne against Edge, John Cena, and Brock Lesnar. When Big E realized his dream. When Sasha and Bianca made history at WrestleMania. When the Viper reluctantly became friends with a barefoot bro. And when fans finally came back to arenas and the noise they made reminded everyone why wrestling matters in the first place. 2021 was the year WWE found its identity again, and it came from the most unexpected places. Roman Reigns entered 2021 as a man who had finally figured himself out. The tribal chief persona, the arrogance, the backing of the Usos and Paul Heyman, it all clicked in a way nothing in his career previously had. He wasn't just the world champion, he was now the most important man in wrestling. But throughout 2021, the Tribal Chief's throne would be in dire jeopardy. The year opened with Edge winning the Royal Rumble and setting his sights on Reigns' Universal Championship. The rated R superstar was a cunning veteran who could meet Reigns promo for promo, outsmart his mind games, and make the build feel like a war of egos. By WrestleMania 37, Daniel Bryan had inserted himself into the equation, turning what should have been a singles match into a triple threat. Reigns walked out of Tampa still champion, with the Usos by his side. Bryan's obsession with the title continued through the spring. Their matches were technically some of the finest of the year, but Reigns dispatched him definitively in the end, forcing Bryan off SmackDown entirely. Bryan left the company and debuted in AEW shortly after, as Reigns had literally erased him from the brand. Then, after Reigns defeated Edge once again at Money in the Bank, out came John Cena and laid out the challenge for SummerSlam. Their SummerSlam showdown was built on brutal verbal exchanges where both men said things that blurred the lines between reality and kayfabe. Reigns tore into Cena's part-time status. Cena questioned whether Reigns actually had what it took without a faction around him. The match delivered, and Reigns retained his title once again. But before the Tribal Chief could catch his breath, Brock Lesnar's music hit for the first time in months. He walked into the ring, stared Reigns down, and that was it. The next chapter had announced itself without a single word. The Reigns-Lesnar feud dominated the fall. Suspicion swirled around Paul Heyman, whose past loyalty to Lesnar made every moment between him and Reigns feel loaded with potential betrayal. Reigns defeated Lesnar at Crown Jewel in October, but the tension between the two never settled. By December, Heyman was caught on camera putting Lesnar over in Reigns' absence. The seeds were planted for an inevitable explosion. In one calendar year, Reigns had conquered every major opponent WWE could throw at him, and still kept the audience hungry for what came next. The WWE title scene, on the other hand, on Raw, was dominated by names like Bobby Lashley, Drew McIntyre, and The Miz, who traded the title back and forth. But while Reigns dominated SmackDown and Lashley ruled Raw, The women's division on both brands delivered some of the year's biggest rivalries. It started at WrestleMania 37's Night 1. Bianca Belair had won the Royal Rumble, chosen Sasha Banks, and earned her shot at the SmackDown Women's Championship in what became the first WrestleMania main event between two black women. The match itself was one of the best women's bout on the grandest stage in years. Banks and Belair found a rhythm that felt natural, and when Belair used her own braid as a weapon against Banks and finished with the KOD, the crowd inside Raymond James Stadium embraced the new queen of the SmackDown Women's division. Belair's reign lasted through the summer, building her into one of the company's franchise players. But then, at SummerSlam in Las Vegas, everything changed in seconds. Becky Lynch, returning from over a year away after the birth of her daughter, walked out to a thunderous ovation. She offered a handshake, pulled Belair in, hit the manhandle slam, and won the title in seconds. Lynch spent the rest of the year as a dominant SmackDown Women's Champion, while Belair chased every opening she could find. A returning Sasha Banks complicated things further, setting up a three-way match at Crown Jewel between Lynch, Belair, and Banks that Lynch won. Through the draft, Lynch was moved to Raw and swapped titles with Charlotte Flair in an awkward segment that reignited their rivalry and leaned into the real-life tension between the two stars. Charlotte, Becky, Sasha, and Bianca had spent 2021 collectively carrying the women's division on their backs. Alongside them, you had names like Rhea Ripley, Asuka, Liv Morgan, and Shayna Baszler, who were key players in the division. But the year's most satisfying story didn't belong to any single feud. It belonged to Big E. After spending years as the power of the New Day and an afterthought in the singles title picture, Big E won the Money in the Bank briefcase in 2021 and waited for his moment. It came on a September Monday night when Big E's music hit, and in front of a live crowd that erupted before he even reached the ring, he cashed in and pinned Lashley to win the WWE Championship for the first time in his career. It was one of the purest feel-good moments of the year. On the lighter side of things, RK Bro became 2021's most unlikely success story. And then there were the fans themselves. After over a year of crowd-free shows filmed in the Performance Center bubble, audiences came back in the spring of 2021, and they were deafening. The noise they made at WrestleMania, the electricity at SummerSlam in Las Vegas, the reaction to Big E's cash-in, none of it would have landed the same way in an empty arena. 2021 was proof that professional wrestling, at its best, is not a television production. It's a live conversation between performers and the people who love them. A year that started with chaos on New Year's Day and never really slowed down. When Vince McMahon stepped down, when Cody Rhodes returned to finish his story, and Stone Cold came back to deliver one final stunner. When two titles became one. When the Judgment Day started taking over Raw. 2022 was the year WWE started to feel like a different company and laid the foundation for the next 3 years. The year opened with a curveball nobody saw coming. Roman Reigns was pulled from the Day 1 pay-per-view after testing positive for COVID. In his absence, Brock Lesnar was inserted into the WWE Championship Fatal 4-Way on Raw, and won. The result was 2 titles, 2 brands, 2 champions. And now, they were on a collision course. But getting there wasn't straightforward. At the Royal Rumble, Reigns interfered in Lesnar's title defense against Bobby Lashley, helping Lashley reclaim the title as payback against Lesnar. In response, Lesnar entered the Royal Rumble match as a surprise entrant and won the whole thing. He then chose Reigns as his Mania opponent, and the road to WrestleMania was set. At WrestleMania 38, in what was billed as the biggest match in the event's history, Reigns defeated Lesnar in a winner-take-all unification match, walking out as the undisputed WWE Universal Champion. Reigns was now the undisputed face of the company in every sense of the word. But the story of 2022 on SmackDown wasn't just about the championship, it was about the factions surrounding it. The Bloodline, Reigns, the Usos, and Paul Heyman had been must-watch television for over a year. Then Sami Zayn entered the scene. What started as a comedic subplot, with Zayn desperately campaigning to be accepted as an honorary member of the faction, quietly became the most compelling story in wrestling. The contrast between Zayn's outsider desperation, his comedic skits, and the hesitation on the part of Jay and Roman to let him into the group made for must-see TV. By September, Reigns had formally given Zayn a Bloodline t-shirt and made it official. The question of whether Zayn truly belonged, and whether he could ever betray the group, was a slow-burning thread that would eventually explode into one of WWE's best stories the following year. But while the Bloodline Saga ruled SmackDown, Raw got its own shot of adrenaline on Night 1 of WrestleMania. Seth Rollins had been promised a mystery opponent at WrestleMania by Vince McMahon. When the lights went down and that familiar music began playing, the crowd figured it out before the fireworks could confirm it. Cody Rhodes was back. He'd left WWE in 2016 as Stardust, a face-painted mid-card act he'd outgrown and resented. He spent those 6 years rebuilding himself on the independents, co-founding AEW, and becoming the most talked-about free agent in wrestling when he departed AEW in February 2022. His return at WrestleMania was electric. He defeated Rollins in a solid contest, and the crowd embraced the return of the prodigal son. The rematch at WrestleMania Backlash was even better and cemented Rhodes as WWE's most important new addition in years. Then the third match arrived under the worst possible circumstances. Days before their Hell in a Cell bout, Rhodes tore his pectoral muscle completely off the bone while training. When he walked to the ring in Rosemont, removed his jacket, and revealed the bruising covering half his chest, the arena went silent. He wrestled anyway for 20 brutal minutes, absorbing kendo stick shots and table spots before pinning Rollins for the third straight time. It was one of the gutsiest performances in wrestling history, and it instantly made Rhodes untouchable as a babyface. The injury sidelined him for 8 months, but the story wasn't over. The American Nightmare was back to fulfill his dream, and the stage was set for an inevitable showdown against the head of the table. But while all of this was happening on screen, a massive story was brewing behind the scenes that would change WWE forever. In July, Vince McMahon resigned as WWE chairman and CEO following a Wall Street Journal investigation into allegations of misconduct and hush money payments to former female employees. Triple H, who had recently recovered from a heart condition, was handed creative control. The shift was immediate and visible. Talent that McMahon had released or misused started coming back. Within months, Karrion Kross, Dakota Kai, Braun Strowman, and most significantly, Bray Wyatt had all returned. Wyatt's comeback at Extreme Rules in October was teased for weeks through mysterious White Rabbit vignettes and hidden QR codes embedded in broadcasts until the lights cut at the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia and the Eater of Worlds made his return to a deafening pop at Extreme Rules. That same Extreme Rules card also showcased what Triple H's era looked like at its best. Gunther and Sheamus, two hard-hitting, technically gifted brawlers who might have been overlooked under the previous regime, were given a feud built on pure physical intensity. Their bouts on SmackDown and at Clash at the Castle and Extreme Rules were among the best matches of the year, revitalizing the Intercontinental Championship in the process. On the women's side, Becky Lynch continued her dominance as big-time Bex, while stars like Bianca Belair, Ronda Rousey, Charlotte, Liv Morgan, and Rhea Ripley were other prominent performers. Ripley specifically transformed into a completely new character after joining the Judgment Day and turning heel for the first time in years. In 2022, one chapter closed loudly with Reigns unifying the titles. Another opened quietly with a new creative hand steering the ship. The company that finished 2022 looked and felt different from the one that started it, and in 2023, that change would be even more visible. A year that saw Cody Rhodes come agonizingly close to finishing his story. When CM Punk made his return. When Seth Rollins made history as the inaugural champion of a new title and carried Raw on his back all year. When Rhea Ripley became mommy, and we said goodbye to Bray Wyatt. 2023 was a year that kept delivering when you least expected it, but it was also a year of close calls and farewells. Our story starts at the Royal Rumble in January, when the Bloodline Saga entered its most emotional chapter. Sami Zayn, after months of proving his loyalty to the Bloodline, finally snapped at the Royal Rumble, choosing to hit Roman Reigns with a chair rather than attack his best friend, Kevin Owens. 3 weeks later, Zayn got his hometown title shot against Reigns at the Elimination Chamber in Montreal. The crowd was electric in a way that rarely happens for a match without a title change. And when Reigns still found a way to survive, the collective heartbreak inside that arena could be felt through the TV screens. Zayn and Owens then teamed to win the undisputed tag team championships on Night 1 of WrestleMania 39. Giving the saga its first legit payoff. Night 2, however, belonged to Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns. The American Nightmare had returned from injury and won the Royal Rumble to earn a shot at winning the one title that had eluded him his entire career. The main event was as good as the build deserved, and then Solo Sikoa delivered a Samoan spike, while Heyman distracted the referee. Rhodes had come so close, and his unfinished story immediately became the most anticipated rematch in years. The bloodline continued to fracture through the summer and fall. Jey Uso, caught between family loyalty and his conscience, eventually walked away and signed with Raw. His departure cracked the foundation. Jimmy sided with Reigns. Solo grew more imposing by the week. The Bloodline soap opera had no clean resolution in 2023, but with more threads pulling apart, things were set for an explosive WrestleMania the following year. However, while Reigns and Rhodes carried SmackDown, Raw had its own story to tell. With Reigns as the undisputed champion on SmackDown, WWE revived the World Heavyweight Championship on Raw and held a tournament to crown its inaugural champion. Seth Rollins beat AJ Styles in the final at Night of Champions and then spent the rest of 2023 proving exactly why he's one of the best in-ring performers of this generation. He defended the title on pay-per-view and even on regular television against Priest, Finn, Nakamura, and Drew McIntyre. He wrestled with a fractured lumbar spine in the fall and kept going anyway. By Survivor Series, his title had become the symbol of Raw's main event scene. The Judgment Day was the engine driving most of the conflict around him. Rhea Ripley was dominant as Women's World Champion, combining with Dominic Mysterio in a dynamic that made him one of the most satisfying heels in years. Damian Priest won the Money in the Bank briefcase in July, teased cashing it in all year, and held the threat like a loaded gun. Finn and JD McDonough rounded out the faction, giving them stakes in every storyline on Raw simultaneously. And while all of this unfolded on TV, 3 moments in the final months of 2023 hit harder than anything scripted could. On August 24th, Wyndham Rotunda, known to the world as Bray Wyatt, died of a heart attack at just 36 years old. WWE ran a tribute SmackDown the following week. Wrestlers wept openly on camera. The Fireflies lit up arenas across the country in his honor. It was a reminder, brutal and sudden, that behind every character is a human being. The wrestling world had barely processed his loss when October arrived. Survivor Series brought the night nobody fully believed was coming. Randy Orton, absent for over a year due to a serious back injury, entered the War Games cage and hit one of the wildest RKOs of his career. And then, after the match was over and the pyro had barely cooled, hell froze over. Cult of Personality played and CM Punk was back in Chicago. Nearly a decade after his bitter departure, after years of public grievances, podcasts, and what felt like a permanently closed door, he stood at the top of the ramp, arms outstretched, staring at a crowd that had spent 9 years waiting for exactly this moment. Gunther, meanwhile, quietly had one of the best years of any champion in the company, retaining the Intercontinental Championship against Sheamus, Braun Strowman, and others in physical, old-school title defenses that made the belt feel important again. His reign was approaching record territory by year's end, and few people were talking about taking it from him. 2023 was a year of returning legends, a real-life tragedy, and an almost finished story. But the almosts kept the audience hungrier than any clean ending ever could. That ending would arrive in 2024 in one of the most satisfying WrestleMania moments of all time. When Cody Rhodes finally finished the story. When The Rock returned and reminded everyone why he's the final boss. When a feud between 2 bitter rivals produced the year's most violent matches. When a love triangle heat up the summer on Raw. And when the most unlikely alliance in WWE history closed out the year. 2024 was the year WWE delivered on everything it had been building toward. But the road to WrestleMania started with a curveball. Cody Rhodes had won the Royal Rumble again and was set for another shot at Reigns. But then, The Rock appeared on SmackDown and stared down Reigns, implying he wanted the title shot instead. When WWE began to steer toward a Rock vs. Reigns WrestleMania, fan backlash was immediate and overwhelming. The hashtag #WeWantCody trended globally for days. WWE, rarely acknowledging crowd pressure so openly, pivoted. The Rock was repositioned as the villain alongside Reigns, branding himself the final boss, a TKO board member, a man who could fire referees and bend the rules as he wished. The story got more ambitious and more chaotic. The Night 1 main event was a tag match, Rhodes and Rollins versus Reigns and The Rock, with a massive stipulation attached. If Reigns and Rock won, the title match on Night 2 would be fought under Bloodline rules, with no disqualifications. After losing the match, Rhodes walked into the main event on Night 2 at a disadvantage, exactly as he had at WrestleMania 39. Jimmy Uso interfered, only for Jey Uso to counter with a spear off the stage. Solo Sikoa attacked, only for John Cena to return and neutralize him. The Rock arrived to protect Reigns, and then the lights went out and the gong hit. The Undertaker appeared, delivered a chokeslam to The Rock, and vanished. Rollins came out in Shield gear to take the chair shot Reigns had intended for Rhodes. With everyone gone, it was just Reigns and Rhodes in the ring. 3 crossroads later, Roman Reigns' 1,316 days as champion was over. For the first time in history, a Rhodes held the WWE Championship. Cody's mother was in the ring. His wife was in the ring. Half the locker room was in the ring to celebrate. The story was finished. However, this wasn't the only world title change at WrestleMania 40. Night 2 opened with Drew McIntyre defeating Seth Rollins for the World Heavyweight Championship, but the celebration lasted approximately 90 seconds. CM Punk, who had been sidelined since McIntyre injured his triceps in the Royal Rumble match and was seated ringside at commentary, swept McIntyre's legs, sending him crashing off the commentary table. Damian Priest immediately cashed in his Money in the Bank briefcase and pinned a stunned McIntyre to become the new champion. All of McIntyre's dreams were once again broken. What followed was the most personal feud of the year. McIntyre and Punk spent months tormenting each other in ways that felt genuinely uncomfortable. Punk cost McIntyre his rematch at Clash at the Castle in Scotland, the Scotsman's home country, by disguising himself as the special guest referee. McIntyre responded by ambushing Punk in Chicago, leaving him bloodied and stealing a bracelet from his wrist engraved with the names of Punk's wife and dog. It was petty, personal, and brilliant storytelling. McIntyre won the Money in the Bank briefcase in July, tried to cash in that same night, and Punk foiled him again. Their feud ran through 3 matches: SummerSlam, Bash in Berlin, and finally a Hell in a Cell at Bad Blood in October, where Punk won decisively in one of the most physical matches of the year. Priest, meanwhile, held the World Heavyweight Championship through the summer before losing it to Gunther at SummerSlam. Gunther had won the King of the Ring tournament earlier in the year, giving him the platform to step up to the main event. His title reign was methodical and dominant, immediately positioning him as Raw's most credible heavyweight heading into 2025. But while all of this was unfolding on the men's side, the women's division had its own story of revenge and restitution. Rhea Ripley had been the women's world champion for over a year when Liv Morgan blindsided her in a backstage attack that forced Ripley to relinquish the title she had never been pinned for. Morgan declared herself on a revenge tour, won the vacant title by defeating Becky Lynch, and then spent the summer manipulating Dominic Mysterio right in front of the entire Judgment Day. Ripley returned in July and spent months chasing what was taken from her, culminating in a war at Survivor Series War Games where she put Morgan through a table from the top rope to settle the score. The Intercontinental Championship had a headline story of its own. Gunther's record-breaking 666-day reign ended at WrestleMania 40 Night 1, where Sami Zayn beat him and celebrated with his wife. His time as champion was relatively brief. Braun Breaker, a freight train of a second-generation wrestler, won it at SummerSlam and immediately became the division's most physically imposing presence. Also at SummerSlam, Roman Reigns returned for the first time since losing at WrestleMania as the OTC. He reunited with Jay, Jimmy, Sami Zayn, and most unexpectedly, CM Punk to defeat Solo Sikoa's new bloodline in War Games. 2024 was the year of finished stories, new arrivals, and with John Cena announcing his retirement tour for next year, it looked like 2025 was set to be another great year for WWE. However, baffling booking decisions and corporate interference made sure that wouldn't be the case. On paper, 2025 should have been one of the hottest years in WWE history. We got John Cena turning heel for the first time in 20 years. We got the return of AJ Lee and Brock Lesnar, SummerSlam became a 2-night event, and the company continues to break revenue records month after month. But if you ask any longtime fan who's been watching the product week in and week out, they'll tell you that WWE in 2025 is a boring, sloppy, and mediocre mess that is completely different from the gritty and rebellious product that we all fell in love with in the first place. The soul is gone. No new stars are being made. Rivalries start and end without any payoff. The pay-per-views don't feel special anymore. And even the big moments lead to nothing more than some viral reels and a one-off pop. So what exactly makes 2025 the lamest, blandest, and most boring year in WWE history? And why does it look like the WWE under Triple H has completely lost its balls? Let's find out. Let's start from the beginning of the year with the hottest story from the company that had the entire wrestling world buzzing, the John Cena heel turn. For over a decade, wrestling fans begged for it. John Cena turning heel was the forbidden fruit of professional wrestling. It was the one thing that everybody wanted, but nobody expected. When it finally happened at Elimination Chamber 2025, the wrestling world erupted. Social media went nuts. Casual fans who had left watching tuned back in. This was supposed to be the moment. Cena's final run, his last chance to show a side of himself we'd never seen before. The speculation was endless. The excitement was at its peak. Fans wanted to see how dark Cena could go. What would his new gear look like? What would his new heel theme song sound like? What would his new finisher be? Who would he feud against? The possibilities were endless. But WWE, in classic Triple H fashion, completely fumbled the bag. Instead of giving us a ruthless, calculated villain, we got a watered-down Cena who looked confused instead of being dangerous. Every single week, he cut the exact same promo, the same tired insults, the same forced edge that felt more like a 50-year-old dad trying to be cool than an actual heel. The storylines and feuds were shallow and meant for one-off nostalgia pulls. There was no grand plan and no payoff building towards something meaningful. It was just Cena being kind of mean for a few months while Triple H threw random opponents at him week after week. And then, just as abruptly as it started, it ended. One day, Cena was a heel. The next week, he was magically a babyface again. No build-up to the face turn, no clear justification, just a lazy retcon that completely ruined Cena's heel run and treated the audience like they had the memory of a goldfish. John Cena himself has admitted in interviews that his heel run sucked. And even now, instead of giving him a proper farewell tour that cements his legacy, Triple H is booking Cena against random opponents and throwing him into squash matches that actively destroy everything he built over 20 years. But Cena's heel run wasn't just a one-off failure. It's just a symptom of a much bigger problem with how Triple H's booking has neutered the entire roster. In 2025, Triple H's booking has been exposed as painfully mediocre, and the mistakes are impossible to ignore. For months, we gave him the benefit of the doubt. We trusted him to recreate the magic he captured in NXT back on the main roster. But now, the cracks are staring us right in the face. In fact, the biggest flaw in Triple H's booking is that he cannot pull the trigger on new stars. LA Knight has been over with the crowd for years. He has the look, the charisma, the mic skills, and the crowd eating out of his hand. By now, he should have been at least a two-time world heavyweight champion. But every single time it's been time to pull the trigger on Knight, Triple H hesitates. He goes with the safer option, and LA Knight remains stuck in mid-card purgatory. The same story plays out across the roster. Drew McIntyre is booked like an afterthought despite being one of the most complete performers in the company. Jacob Fatu was hot for weeks, but Triple H kept him stuck in a boring feud with Solo. Carmelo Hayes came up from NXT looking like a future main eventer, but he is being completely wasted on SmackDown. Julia won the US Women's Championship and then disappeared. The tag titles get completely ignored, and the feuds feel randomly generated. Nobody except Triple H's favorites, like Seth Rollins, Rhea Ripley, and Sami Zayn, get booked consistently. This is the pattern. Triple H doesn't build new stars, and when someone threatens to get over on their own terms, he either ignores them or gets rid of them. The hottest periods for WWE have always been when there's a new megastar on the rise, be it Stone Cold's meteoric rise during the Attitude Era, be it Cena's rise to stardom during the Ruthless Aggression Era, or more recently, Roman Reigns' transformation into the Tribal Chief and the Bloodline Saga. But in 2025, WWE has shown no intention of creating any new stars for the future. Triple H simply wants to rely on celebrity appearances and old-timers coming back for cheap pops instead of building the stars of tomorrow. But perhaps nothing illustrates Triple H's problem more than his desperate need to make himself the main character. The main objective of shows like WWE Unreal is to remind everyone that Triple H is in charge. He has to be front and center. He has to insert himself into every big moment and every celebration. The guy who spent his entire in-ring career politicking his way to the top hasn't changed one bit. He's just traded his wrestling boots for a suit. And let's not forget what he's actually said about the fans. Triple H has basically told us that he thinks WWE fans should be mindless bots and just enjoy the show without critiquing it. He doesn't want an engaged audience, he wants an obedient one. The moment you dare suggest that maybe his booking isn't perfect, you're dismissed as a hater who simply doesn't get it. The truth is painfully clear. Triple H is terrified of taking risks. Everything he does is calculated to avoid backlash, to play it safe, and to never rock the boat too much. And that cowardice has infected every aspect of WWE programming. Shows like Unreal and the endless stream of WWE-produced podcasts are a major reason why the product has been stripped of its mystique. But before we get into that, we need to talk about the absolute garbage WWE has been putting out every week on Mondays and Fridays, because that's where things get really depressing. Remember when you'd tune into Monday Night Raw genuinely not knowing what was going to happen? You had Cena throwing Edge into the Long Island Sound. You had Austin driving a beer truck to the ring. You had Triple H breaking into Randy Orton's home. You had Kane setting people on fire. Remember when championships could change hands on a random episode of SmackDown? When CM Punk and Jeff Hardy had a steel cage match for the World Heavyweight title on SmackDown? When Edge won the WWE title on a random episode of Raw? When Shawn Michaels and Cena put on a banger during an episode of Raw in London? Remember when you'd be genuinely excited to tune into an episode of Raw or SmackDown and expect an actual good show? Those days are dead and buried. Every episode of Raw on Netflix in 2025 is nothing more than a filler. Every show follows the same formula. You get an opening promo that goes too long. You get a commercial break every 7 minutes. You get some variant of the Vision or Rhea Ripley in the main event. Rinse and repeat. The spontaneity is gone. The chaos that made wrestling feel alive has been sanitized out of existence. SmackDown is so bad I'm not even going to waste my breath on it. You have a bunch of women's titles with no storylines or directions, just added to appear inclusive and fill time. And don't even get me started on the pay-per-views. WrestlePalooza was widely considered the worst WWE pay-per-view of the year. It was supposed to be WWE's grand debut on ESPN. Triple H told us to expect surprises. But all we got was a collection of forgettable matches topped off by John Cena getting squashed by Brock Lesnar. But that wasn't an exception. It has become the norm in 2025. Modern WWE PLEs feel like they're checking boxes rather than telling stories. You get a women's match, a tag match, and if Triple H is feeling generous enough, he'll throw in a world title match on the 5-match card. 5 matches per show isn't enough content to justify what fans are paying, yet Triple H acts like less is more, while every PLE continues to be worse than the one before. But the most damning indictment of modern WWE isn't the booking, it's the roster itself. Drew McIntyre said it best when he called out the roster and said that 85% of our guys don't look like they should be in WWE. There's no aura. There are no larger-than-life personalities that make you stop scrolling and pay attention. It's just a bunch of regular guys who happen to be somewhat athletic. Roman Reigns is the only person on the entire roster with genuine aura, and even that took almost a decade of failures to create. The rest of the male roster is just filled with dudes cosplaying as pro wrestlers. They're talented guys, sure, but they don't look like stars. They don't carry themselves like megastars. They don't have that undeniable swagger or presence of guys like The Undertaker, Kane, Hogan, Cena, the energy that's infectious, that makes you want to see them succeed or fail. Today's wrestlers look like they could be sitting next to you at Starbucks. They don't feel like attractions worth paying to see. And it's not just their physicality, it's the character work. Everyone's gimmick is about wanting to be the best wrestler. That's it. That's the extent of their personality. There are no distinguishing traits, unique motivations, and no reason to care about them beyond the fact that they're good at wrestling. And speaking of WWE losing its balls, let's talk about how the women's revolution has completely alienated the core fanbase of the company. Today, you have the women's US title, women's IC title, women's tag titles, women's world titles, and matches that once used to be piss breaks are now supposed to be main events. It's cool to give a women's feud the spotlight when the stakes are right, but just filling up the card with a bunch of women's matches to appear progressive is one of the biggest examples of how spineless WWE has become under Triple H's leadership. Wrestling thrives on grittiness, on that sense that anything could happen, on larger-than-life characters colliding in ways that feel personal and raw. Modern WWE has none of that. The wrestlers feel manufactured, the shows feel sterile. Everything is too polished and too bright, but you want to know what's actively making this problem even worse? Let's talk about the biggest culprit that's stripping away the last remaining shreds of mystique from pro wrestling. Pro wrestling has always walked a fine line between reality and fiction. The art form depends on suspension of disbelief, on fans knowing it's a show but still getting emotionally invested in the characters and stories, just like they do for a Marvel movie. Kayfabe was the foundation upon which wrestling's magic was built. WWE Unreal on Netflix took that foundation, doused it in gasoline, and burned it to the ground. Watching wrestlers like Punk and Rollins casually discuss their months-long blood feud, like their co-workers reviewing a project, actively destroys fans' investment in the story. Seeing wrestlers laugh and joke about storylines that were supposed to be intensely personal makes you feel like an idiot for ever caring in the first place. And WWE Unreal isn't alone. There are just too many podcasts hosted by WWE wrestlers these days, and they're all doing the same damage. Cody Rhodes has a podcast. Stephanie McMahon has a podcast. Undertaker has a podcast. Just a few months ago, Cody Rhodes' podcast featured an episode with Kevin Owens where they sat around laughing and chatting like friends just months after they had an intense, brutal, bloody feud that was supposed to mean something. Now imagine peak John Cena as WWE champion sitting down and laughing with Randy Orton or Edge on a podcast during their rivalry in 2006. Would you still be sold on their next feud? Would their matches still feel important? The problem isn't that fans are too stupid to know wrestling is scripted. The problem is that WWE is actively destroying the immersive experience that made wrestling special. When Stone Cold and Mr. McMahon had their legendary feud, they didn't sit down for cozy podcast interviews breaking down the storyline. They stayed in character. They protected the business. They understood that the illusion, even if everyone knew it was an illusion, was what made the magic work. Modern wrestlers have zero concept of this. They're on Twitter breaking character. They're posting backstage selfies with their supposed enemies. They're doing Instagram lives where they casually discuss their storylines. The aura that once surrounded these larger-than-life characters has been replaced by the sad reality that they're just regular people playing dress-up. But here's the truly dystopian part. Even as WWE systematically destroys everything that made their product compelling, they have the audacity to charge you more than ever before to watch it all fall apart. It used to be cheap to be a WWE fan. The WWE Network was $10 a month, and you got everything. Raw, SmackDown, every pay-per-view, the entire archive. It was an incredible deal that made wrestling accessible to everyone. But now, thanks to the new ESPN deal, if you're a fan in the United States and you want to watch everything legally, you have to spend almost $1,000 a year in subscriptions alone just to enjoy the product. And that's before we even talk about ticket prices. WrestleMania 42 front row seats cost up to $70,000. Randy Orton was literally caught on camera cringing when a fan told him they paid over $30,000 for their seats for SummerSlam. The ticket prices have spiraled so far out of control that families have to take out a mortgage just to watch a mediocre show with 5 matches. Even the wrestlers themselves are uncomfortable with how exploitative the pricing has become. But WWE isn't satisfied with just bleeding your wallet dry through subscriptions and tickets. They need to monetize absolutely everything. Every single thing in WWE now has an advertisement attached to it. The ring mat used to be sacred. Now there are 50 ads plastered on it. It's become so absurd that they've started putting ads on tables, ladders, and even the Money in the Bank briefcase. You're not watching wrestling anymore. You're watching one long, never-ending advertisement interrupted occasionally by wrestling. And the reason all this is happening is because TKO, the parent company, is drowning in debt. To make up for this massive financial hole, they have to monetize everything and squeeze the fans until there's nothing left. Which brings us to the most shameless cash grab in WWE history that perfectly demonstrates how spineless WWE has become in 2025. WWE announced that WrestleMania 43 will take place in Saudi Arabia in 2027, the first time the event will be staged outside of America. This isn't about growing the sport globally. It's about one thing and one thing only: money. Instead of giving the privilege to a hot crowd like France or London, WWE sold out WrestleMania for a paycheck. Saudi Arabia is writing blank checks, and WWE is cashing them without a second thought about what it means for the fans, the wrestlers, or the integrity of the product. WrestleMania was supposed to be a celebration. Now it's just another commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. This is what WWE has become under TKO and Triple H, a soulless corporate machine that views wrestling not as an art form or even entertainment, but just as a product to be monetized. The passion is gone. The creativity is dead. WWE in 2025 has gained millions in shareholder value, but in exchange, it has lost its balls. And this brings us to the present-day WWE in 2026. After the disappointing showing in 2025, WWE in 2026 seemed to be headed down the same route. The build to WrestleMania 42 lacked intensity, and Night 1 of Mania was widely criticized. However, the company redeemed itself with Night 2 and brought back the feeling that made WrestleMania the grandest stage in the first place. WWE in 2026 has all the tools needed to restore the magic and bring back the energy that made us fall in love with wrestling. We have established stars, hungry newcomers, a global audience, and the platform to deliver some of the best wrestling shows of all time. The pieces are there. The question is whether Triple H and TKO nail the execution and usher in WWE's next great era, or will WWE head towards another dark period? As a lifelong wrestling fan, I really hope for the best, because when it's done right, there's nothing in this world that comes close to the magic of professional wrestling and WWE.